Greetings and salutations, fellow book readers. This is Mark, and the book I will review today is The Red and the Black. Before we continue, this is personalized limited edition of The Red and the Black with leather cover designed and made by me. At the end of the video, I will tell you a couple of ways of how you can get one for yourself, if you are interested. Now let's get back to the review. The Red and the Black, a chronicle of the 19th century, is an 1830 novel by the French writer Marie-Henri Belle, commonly known as Stendhal. Stendhal lived between 1783 and 1842, which were very tumultuous times for France, the end of the kingdom and beginning of the Republic. He witnessed the terror of the French Revolution in his teens, later the wars under the rule of Napoleon, during which he participated in the disastrous invasion of Russia, and then he emigrated to Italy during the temporary re-establishment of the monarchy. All these events shaped his personality and political views and made him into a firm libertarian, critic of the church, and gave him somewhat ambiguous feelings about the monarchy. Further, the before-mentioned experiences also influenced his writings, which can be seen in the plots and the protagonists of his novels. Stendhal was also a dandy and a devoted womanizer, but being a 19th century French aristocrat, it is typical and understandable. What is The Red and the Black about? The book is about the self-destructive power of ambition, spurred by uncontrolled pride and inferiority complex. Also, this is an attempt at portraying pride as life's ultimate driving force, even eclipsing the instinct of survival and self-preservation. All of it is presented over the background of the early 19th century France during the Bourbon Restoration and its efforts to scale back the effects of the French Revolution. The plot takes place on the eve of the 1830 July Revolution, which for the second time tried to get rid of the monarchy, this time without guillotine, but all it accomplished was replacing one king, Charles X, with a bit younger Louis Philippe. A bit of the plot. The story takes place in the eastern France in the late 1820s, and the main character is Julien Sorel, the youngest son of a woodworker, starting his adult life. The book is divided into two volumes. Volume 1 starts with introducing Julien, who is an 18-year-old youth, spending most of his time reading about Napoleon and his successes, instead of focusing on working his father's lumber shop. He dreams about getting away from his family and the poverty and comes to the conclusion that religion offers the best opportunity to get out. He assists in the local church and as the result is referred by the priest to become a tutor for the town's mayor's, Monsieur de Renal's children. Julien moves into the mayor's house and falls in love with his wife, Madame de Renal, and eventually they start an affair. It all leads to complications which result in Julien being sent to the seminary in Besançon, the department's capital. But it is made obvious that Julien's heart is not really in the church and its activities, so he is appointed to be an assistant to a French diplomat, Marquis de la Mole. In Volume 2, we find Julien living in Paris and serving the Marquis. He writes letters, takes notes during meetings, and is sent on a few secret missions. And in his free time, he manages to seduce the Marquis's daughter, which leaves the latter furious. As the Marquis's anger subsides and he becomes somewhat willing to accept the circumstances, he receives a letter which describes Julien and his doings in rather unflattering terms. Now Julien becomes furious and finds out who the author of the letter was and decides to take his revenge. which leads to a tragic finale for the parties involved, and that's the basic plot. What are my thoughts about The Red and the Black? For me, the book is somewhat reminiscent of the great Russian novels such as War and Peace or Anna Karenina. It is connected to the social, political, and religious situation of the early 19th century France. So if you're not curious or interested in the history of those times, the reading might seem tedious and boring. On the other hand, the book is a window and an accurate portrait of the prevailing conditions in the country, presented as a novel through the personal experiences of an individual. The title I interpret as referring to the military, the red, and the clergy, the black. The two worlds Julian Sorel drifts between and aspires to join at different times, as his path to higher society. His original choice was to be an officer, but unfortunately the glory days of his hero, Napoleon, are long gone, so he decides to become a priest, which also offers a good possibility of upward mobility, but finds it difficult to commit because of his love and hate relationship with the bourgeois, and becoming one of them seems to be his real objective. He is jealous of rich people, but his pride doesn't allow him to admit it to himself, and instead it fools him into thinking he despises them. A lot of it is driven by his inferiority complex. He hates being looked down on, so his seduction of the Marquis's daughter is a bit of revenge against people who think he's not good enough to be one of them. This includes the Marquis's daughter, Mademoiselle de la Mole. Julian is young and idealistic, and because of it a bit naive, since most of his knowledge comes from reading, which is known to distort reality. His insight into the upper society comes from Jean-Jacques Rousseau's Confessions, to which he refers repeatedly, but the book was written over half a century before, pre-French Revolution, when the country was a very different place, and this somewhat compounds his confusion. Julian Sorel is an intelligent and ambitious young man, prevented from achieving his full potential and deserve rewards by a rigid class structure. I would say he is a rather common example throughout the history of how a person's overambition and pride creates and leads one onto a self-destructive path. This line from the book, "Fate, I am no such fool, everyone for himself in this desert of selfishness which is called life," gives an idea of how Julian felt about the world. So Julian is ambitious and proud and even arrogant, but also intelligent and competent, and his desire is to live in the world of the rich. So to achieve it, he knows he needs to have a plan, also plan B, and trust nobody but himself. An English traveler relates how he lived upon intimate terms with a tiger. He had reared it and used to play with it, but always kept a loaded pistol on the table. This quote somewhat reflects Julian's relationship with the bourgeois, but unfortunately in this scenario the tiger was quicker than his hand. For me, Julian seems to represent the type of individuals who brought about the French Revolution, smart, ambitious, and with plenty of animosity for the people above them. But in the end, they were consumed by their hate. Julian's life seems to be his own little revolution, and in the end, he ends up just like his more illustrious heroes. Another important character in the book is Madame de Renal, who is your typical landowner's wife, a bored housewife in a marriage of convenience with an older and unemotional man, an easy target for a young, handsome, idealistic, and passionate boy who somewhat looks up to her. She comes across as passive and naive, but she is simply resigned, even accommodated to her fate as a 19th century provincial woman, and accepts her husband for what he is because she thinks all men are like him. But when an opportunity or new reality presents itself, she becomes active, shrewd, and calculated. One more key character in Julian's tragedy is Mathilde de la Mole, the Marquis's daughter, who is a spoiled, rich brat, playing with men because she knows she is beautiful and desirable. She is bored with her life and tired of the rich, pretty boys trying to please her. She has everything and was told she should be happier than anybody else, but she is not, and because of it has many doubts, curiosities, and unfulfilled needs. She wants something extraordinary, even if it is dangerous, and finds somebody like Julien Sorel interesting, but confusing and doesn't know how to react. And because of it, she feels alive, but scared. But she is also resistant and uncertain about her new adventure, because as she puts it, she doesn't want her life in the end to only be a shadow instead of a wolf. Further, the book is about love, first love, confusing and foolish, even selfish. Stendhal seems not to take it seriously and somewhat dismisses it. He writes, "A melancholy air can never be the right thing. What you want is a bored air. If you are melancholic, it must be because you want something. There is something in which you have not succeeded. It is showing your inferiority. If you are bored, on the other hand, it is the person who has tried in vain to please you who is inferior." The relationships Julien has with Madame de Renal and later with Mathilde de la Mole are everything but boring. What is the use of love that makes one yawn? One might as well take to religion. There is bliss and misery, jubilation and heartache, jealousy, anger, etc., etc., etc. It is a love triangle, and each of the participants plays to win on his own terms. According to the old aphorism, all is fair in love and war. There is very little submission, since each one is doing what is best for the self. The plot is an emotional rollercoaster for the protagonist, and in the end it is visible all the ups and downs have taken their toll on him. He seems to be disappointed with love and the whole idea of happiness, at least what he thought happiness is supposed to be. Good heavens, is being happy, is being loved, no more than that? And this deception left him somewhat resigned and without will and energy to continue. But at the same time, he seems to have appreciated the journey. The traveler, who's just climbed a steep mountain, sits down at the top and finds perfect pleasure in resting. Would he be as happy if he were forced to do nothing but rest? The Red and the Black also is a general view of the French society post-Napoleonic Wars, when the upper classes try to restore the monarchy and go back to the pre-revolutionary order. Stendhal tries to relate the divisive political climate in the 1820s France when Julien, on his way to Paris, listens to two men arguing for and against the Napoleon and his politics. The book shows the lower classes to be more assertive and vocal and act with more confidence when dealing with people above them, and Julien is a good example. The upper classes, on the other hand, seems to have a bit of fear in them, probably because they still remember the years of the reign of terror under Robespierre when the guillotine was working overtime, and are careful about what and how they talk, at least the older ones. The youngsters like Mademoiselle de la Mole haven't experienced the bloodbath of the revolution, so they are more uninhibited and express their political thoughts and criticisms freely. There are plenty of allusions to the French Revolution in the novel and how it relates to the early 19th century, where there were fermenting conditions for another revolution. The ordinary procedure of the 19th century is that when a powerful and noble personage encounters a man of feeling, he kills, exiles, imprisons, or so humiliates him that the other, like a fool, dies of grief. I think the French Revolution did make France, at least socially, the most advanced country. Since at the time the book was written, the English were locked in their rigid class system, still are. The Americans were living in the woods, and Russia was basically a feudal state. To sum it up, The Red and the Black is one of those great 19th century French novels. The 19th century seems to have been a pinnacle of the French literature, with Flaubert, Balzac, Victor Hugo, Émile Zola, and many others. The plot of The Red and the Black seems a twist on Romeo and Juliet, but with the French flavor, ménage à trois. The suspicion that a rival is loved is painful enough already, but to have the love that he inspires in her confessed to one in detail by the woman whom one adores is without doubt the acme of suffering. There is plenty of action and drama, and at the same time the book might seem too long and boring and even mind-numbing. But unlike today, back then there were fewer books, less distractions, and more free time for the better-off individuals, especially the women. And these were the only people who could read, so they wanted the novels to go on as long as possible. Also, the beauty of the classics is in the details, and you have to be patient to appreciate and enjoy them. I think the character of Julien Sorel was expanded on by Guy de Maupassant in Bel Ami. The book came to my mind while I was reading The Red and the Black. There seems to be a common thread of depicting unbound ambition and uncontrolled pride in a lower-class individual, but the finale is different. The novel has been adapted into cinema a few times. I have seen a French version from the 1990s, but the one I really enjoyed was a miniseries made for the Soviet TV in the 70s. It followed the plot pretty good, so this one I would recommend. You can find it on YouTube. The film is in original Russian language, but I think it comes with subtitles. Okay, let's talk about the physical book. The book I am holding is a paper bag which I transform into hardcover leather-bound edition. To make the cover, I used grade A naturally tan hide I buy from a tanner in North Spain. It is the same leather Louis Vuitton uses to make his bag, so it is top quality. I do all the processing of the leather myself. First, I designed the cover, and for this I found this 19th century painting of a young man climbing out of the window and a lady seemingly looking with apprehension at the door. A situation reminiscent of Julien's and Madame de Renal love games. This is the bag with the blurb, and inside front cover I printed a quote from the book. If you want to see a more detailed video where I explain how I transform paper bag into hardcover, click on the link in the description. I will make a maximum of 100 editions of each title. Each one will be numbered and initialed, and the numbers will go in chronological order from 2 up, since number 1 stays with me. The price will be around $100, so if you would like me to make one for you, you can click below on my email and send me a message. I do not guarantee I will do it, since it will depend on the time I have available access to leather and if I can get my hands on the copy of the book. Now, if you're not willing to spend $100 but you still want the book, what you can do is click below on the PayPal link and donate $3 or more to my channel, and for every 100 donations I will make a lottery and draw one name, and the winner will receive the book. So if you are cheap but feel lucky, this might be the way to do it. Also, your donations give me the extra motivation to make the book reviews, and I appreciate them very much. So thank you in advance. One more thing, when you make your donation, remember to include the title of the book you would like to win. The book itself is beautiful. Visually, it has a very nice texture, it smells great, and the more you handle it, the more beautiful it will become. And it makes a great gift for yourself or somebody who appreciates books. So if you want one, don't snooze or you might lose. Well, that's it, so let's end it here, and until next time, keep your ear close to the ground and read the book. Adios.